first episode, we have a special guest joining us today, Dr. Judith Barbaro-Brown. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I hope I've not butchered it. Yeah. Dr. Barbaro-Brown is an educator, assistant master, and acting vice principal at Gray College. Forgotten how to speak today. Her key areas of interest are vascular pathology, tissue viability, clinical education, and professional identity development, which I think is really interesting, and I'd love to dive deep into that. Dr. Barbaro-Brown began her journey at Durham University, graduating in pediatric medicine before achieving many more qualifications that we're going to discuss today. So, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing, first of all?
I'm well. It's a semi-warm day here up in lovely, gorgeous Durham City. So it's not too bad today. So having quite a nice day so far.
That's good. So tell me, Doctor, when you first began your journey at Durham University and after you'd graduated, did you think to yourself, I'm definitely going down the road of research, or what was that journey like?
No, not at all. So when I qualified from podiatry school, it was in 1989, okay. Many moons ago, and I was going directly into the NHS, as most of my classmates did. Very few of our class went anywhere else but in the NHS. So I went into the NHS straight away and worked for local trust, or they were just becoming trusts at that point when the NHS was going through a lot of changes. So I went into the NHS. And as a lot of people did, we started in general podiatry, and you really cut your teeth on general clinical work, and whatever came through the door is what you dealt with. So you know, that's how I started. And my plan was I was always going to be in the NHS for quite a long time, and I did want to go into education, but I wanted to make sure I'd actually got a good grounding in actually doing the job first, because I thought, how can I possibly teach people about doing the job when I don't know what the job is?
That's a very, very wise thing to say, an incredibly wise thing. And just to kind of dig a little bit deeper, is that where, so in the NHS, is that where you kind of discovered your interest in tissue viability and vascular pathology? Is that where that love kind of grew?
Yes, it was, because as I worked in a community clinic in a town called Spennymoor, which was a very kind of northeastern classical town that would kind of risen kind of from pit villages and things like that. So, and it had a very kind of a very specific socioeconomic group. So there was a lot of poverty, and kind of levels of employment were quite low. So, and it was interesting that there was a huge range of pathologies, ranging from things like actual polio, from when, you know, those patients who were coming in who were maybe in their 70s had caught polio as children, which is something you very rarely see nowadays. And then there were disorders that related to occupation. So there were lots of disorders related to working down mines and heavy industry. And it was a really interesting area to work in. And of course, the levels of diabetes were very high. And so there were lots of foot pathologies, and we were dealing with lots of ulcerations and lots of breakdowns. Apologies if you can hear my dog, by the way.
No apologies needed. We love all the dogs here.
And that's where it started, really, because at college, there wasn't a huge amount of emphasis put on tissue viability and managing wounds. Even though it was very practically related, it was in those days where, you know, we did about 1,000 hours clinical before we even came out to practice, right. And it was very clinically orientated, but it was very generally clinically orientated. So it was when I started working in the community that I began to realise it was a really interesting area, because, you know, I had to kind of discover as I went, and luckily I worked alongside district nurses who were really useful people to work with. So that's kind of how it started.
So that sounds like you had a real sense of community, and I think even Professor Michael Edmonds would agree that if there's a sense of community in an MDT organization, for example, like it really helps patient outcome.
Absolutely.
So did you find that with when you were working alongside clinical nurses that they helped your learning as well?
Yeah, and it worked both ways. And we had GPs, so it was in an NHS health centre. So we had GPs, there were midwives, health visitors, district nurses. There was speech and language therapy in there. There was clinical psychology in there. So we all actually, because of the way that the building was, even if we didn't have patients in common, we kind of shared space. And so it meant that if you did have somebody that you thought, I don't know about this, but so-and-so will, you could go and knock on their door, or you could catch them at coffee time. So it really created that environment where it felt comfortable talking with other professionals. And I always thought that was normal, because that was what my experience was straight out of college and into the NHS. And then I realised later on that that wasn't how things were at kind of the late 80s, early 90s. For a lot of people, it wasn't that way. Although in the hospitals, particularly in diabetes care, the MDT team, was very well established, but it wasn't out in community where I started.
So that sounds like that must have been quite a challenge to have, something in a community where if it's already established somewhere else, but not within kind of community areas, that must have been quite a challenge to work through.
I think it wasn't as much as you might think. And I think that's possibly because of the personalities. I think that the people who were there gelled well. And I think that made a big difference. And there wasn't the kind of the egotistical kind of problems that sometimes you get in teams. Everybody kind of valued everybody else. So it did make it a lot easier, I have to say. And it meant that, I didn't feel uncomfortable asking and saying, look, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And it was the same the other way. If the district nurses or the GP would say, I've never come across this before, what do you think? Then it felt okay to say, well, actually, it could be this, or, I don't know either. So it really fostered a team that was comfortable working together. And it was such a good experience for me.
For sure.
And I know not everybody had that. So I was very lucky.
Oh. Well, I mean, it's glad to acknowledge, if you're in an environment that's not so quite common, which is quite amazing, actually. But at the same time, I mean, you must have, as you're saying, you must have learned a lot from each other, but then at the same time, you must have taught each other quite a bit. So does that did that reinforce the education part or education pathway that you wanted to follow?
I think it helped. Both my parents were teachers, so there'd always been that kind of background at home. And I think it kind of helped. And as time went on, and I really developed a nail surgery service in our area, and so I got a lot of my fellow podiatrists come who hadn't done nail surgery for a long time or had never done it before, and so I was kind of mentoring and kind of helping. And I think that's what it really kind of moving forward from that. That's what made me think, actually, I really like doing this bit. And I think that was what was kind of the final bit in the puzzle that said to me, I think I want to go down that path.
So what were your first experiences like when you were teaching?
Quite scary. It's quite scary because I think a lot of people, I made this mistake, and I think a lot of new educators do as well, is you go into education and you feel you have to know everything. So that, if any student asks for anything, you've got the answer, because you don't want to feel, that you're stupid or that you don't know, or, you're not worthy of being there. And it took me a little while to realize that you don't need to be like that. And actually, it is all right to say, I don't know. And actually, that's an important thing to be able to say. It's an important skill for students to learn, that if they don't know, they have to say they don't know.
Yeah.
It's a much safer thing to do. And I think that took me a while to kind of get my head around. And I think other things that I found quite difficult was realizing how much preparation was required for things. And again, lots of new teachers think that, oh, I'm going to go and do an hour lecture. It'll take me half an hour. No. Well, it might take you half an hour, but it won't be any good.
Okay.
So, I remember a colleague saying to me, well, for every hour of delivery, you need to be doing 10 hours worth of work. And I thought, no, that's not true, but it is true. So in the early days, because you're looking at making sure you've done all your research and you're reading and you're preparing all your resources and you're checking, and actually I thought, yeah, actually it's about right. You know, you need to be doing a significant amount of work to be ready, because you've got to be able to deliver it, but you have to be able to manage some questions at least. And I think if you know, one of the things that certainly struck me early on is you had to be prepared. And even as time goes on, I've been in higher education for more than 25 years now, and I still, if I'm delivering something, particularly something I'm doing for the first time, it will take me a long time to put it together and make sure everything's there. The more and more I do that thing, I still prepare. So, you know, if I'm doing a say, for example, next week I've got a session on neurological assessment that I'm doing online, and you know, it's something I've taught for years and years and years, but I'll still take me a good few hours to put that together, and make sure that it's right.
Yeah.
So I think they're the two things that kind of were difficult at first.
Did you, I mean, when you first started out teaching, did you have, or even now actually, now that you have, you're an experienced teacher as well as an experienced clinician, do you still get some curveballs thrown your way?
All the time.
How do you stay prepared for that? Or is there just no?
I think you have to be prepared for the unexpected, as in you have to be prepared to acknowledge that you don't know the answer to something. So, and you haven't to be fazed by that, and you haven't to feel undermined by it. You just acknowledge that you cannot possibly know everything. And you also have to acknowledge that sometimes somebody in the room may know more than you. You probably do. So that's fine. But I think all you can do in that situation is, if somebody throws you a curveball, whether it's a question or a very, very odd comment, you know, the thing is I've learned to just stay calm, and because it's easy to panic, particularly if you are say if you're at a conference and there's lots of people there and you've no idea what somebody's going to say to you at all. And I've had some weird questions where I've kind of, in my head, I've thought, oh my goodness, what do I say to this? And you know, and you just have to kind of stay calm, and you can kind of say, well, look, this is what I think it could be, or this is what my thoughts are, you know, but I may not be correct. And I think you just have to be calm. Being calm is the best thing. And if you've done your preparation and you've done, as you know, if you've covered everything you possibly can, then the chances are you're not going to be caught out by anything, you know. Okay, so it's preparation.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So moving on to research, because you co-authored a book and you yourself had written a book as well. What was that an easy decision to make? Did you have any doubts? Did you think, you know, what makes me the expert? Why should I write a book? You know, like there's so many people out there already doing this. Who's going to listen to, I'm assuming these are the doubts that probably went through your head, but that doesn't sound like that was an easy decision.
It was something that kind of naturally fell. It seemed to be a natural part of the process, and it came about when I'd moved from the NHS and I'd moved into teaching in the podiatry school at Durham, and I was working with lots of colleagues, and one colleague in particular said to me, oh, she's writing a book, would you do a chapter on so and so? I think it was professional identity, and I said yeah. So I wrote the chapter, that was fine. I did a few other things, and then I moved to teaching in a medical school in Durham, where I then worked with a lot of other health professionals, and I was working with anaesthetists, and I was teaching a lot of anatomy, and not just lower limb but whole body anatomy. And they said to me, will you write this chapter on spinal anatomy for this book, which is going to be on ultrasound guided analgesia? And I thought, why are they asking me? and I said, well, why are you asking me? And they said, well, you know it, you teach it on the program, so why? And I thought, maybe you're right. And so it was things like that, when people ask you to do things, and my first thought is, oh, I can never do that. Somebody's going to find out that I don't know anything at all. And I think that goes through a lot of people's minds. And then from that, my colleague Catherine Hayes, who I'd worked with at the School of Podiatry, she said, do you know, there's no book out there, there's no textbook out there that actually covers everything that I think students should know and that would be really useful. And I went, yeah, you're right. I said, they're the usual ones, but actually there's nothing. And that's why we came up with the idea of the textbook that we wrote. But we also knew that we couldn't write all the chapters. We had to get people who were the experts in the area. So we wrote some of it ourselves, the things that we felt comfortable with, but we actually asked people to contribute chapters, and I just, I'd never do it again. Whilst it was a real pleasure for the book, it took about 7 years.
Wow.
Because not only was it getting people to do the work, which is very hard, but the whole process of editing it and then sending things back and sometimes having to do major rewrites and then having to get everything ready, and the whole process of putting a big textbook together is quite hard. And I think if anyone asked me again, I would think very carefully about it. But once it was done, it was great to see it. And you know, I hope it's been useful for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. That's good to know. But when I look at it now, I look at all the mistakes. I look at all the things.
Of course, yeah.
That there are chapters that I thought, why did we not put that in? But this is, you know, this is hindsight. Yeah. Everything that you do, particularly in education, afterwards you think, oh, I should have done so and so.
Yeah.
So next time I will do X, Y, Z.
Right. This is after careful thought. If you say yes. So where would you like to see research go in the future? So you've seen research from when you were a student to how it's been currently. Where would you like to see research go in the future?
I think in terms of research around kind of podiatric medicine and foot health and that kind of thing, I think it has to be it's a tricky one, that one, because I think research can go off on a tangent where it's somebody's real hobby horse, and that can be fine, but actually sometimes it's got no use.
Right. It's
got no clinical application. And I think for research really now, and I think because it's so expensive, and I think because it's so it draws in so many resources, and it takes a huge amount of time, and because money's not, you know, as easily available as it was, I think it has to be totally focused on being clinically led. I think it has to be, you know, good old-fashioned, what we used to call action research. You saw something in clinic or you saw something in practice and you thought, why is that happening?
Mm-hmm.
Or how can I make that better? Whereas, you know, when you're looking at classical research, you come up with a theoretical idea and you test it.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're two ends of the spectrum for research, but I think in terms of podiatric research or research into our field and our areas, I think it has to be completely clinically led, and it has to be something that is useful, because I think gone are the days where we can do a bit of research because it seemed interesting, but it had no application. So it's got to be led by clinical need, clinical identification, I think.
So do you think this, I mean, do you think that might put off some of the newer researchers that are up and coming that want to publish in a journal and have their work put out? Do you think?
I don't think so. No, I think actually it makes it easier.
Okay.
I think because, you know, I think some of the best research I've ever read, not that I've written it, that I've read, has come from somebody seeing something, somebody noticing something, and asking the questions. And for me, the best researchers are the people who are curious. And it could just be a really simple question. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be really simple, like, you know, I don't know, if I think about something that kind of fascinated me quite a long time ago was, you know, and it came from the nail surgery healing and things like that. And it was like, well, actually, why do chemical burns take so long to heal? If I didn't put phenol on, it would be healed within 10 days, a week. So why does it? What is it that's going on? And that's kind of where my master's research came from. And it was a simple question, but nobody had ever said before, and this is why chemical burns take so long. And this is what it is about phenol that creates a specific kind of chemical burn. And this is what's going on, you know, and this is why, you know, and that leads on to another question as well. Why do certain demographic groups heal faster than others?
Right.
What is it that's going on there? So I think actually, as an early career researcher, I think it's easier to be curious about things. And it may be that, you know, you ask a question that somebody's asked previously, you know, maybe they've never managed to answer it, and maybe you can, or maybe you can bring something different to it. But I think that's the key, being curious. I think that's the best thing. And I think from an early career researcher, I think that's a much easier springboard into getting into research. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be huge, you know, multi-center, international, you know, whatever. It can be something as simple as, you know, talking to half a dozen patients or students or colleagues, or it can be something as simple as, you know, comparing some dressings or comparing different types of treatment. It can be really simple.
I feel like that takes a lot of pressure off of new researchers that are considering, you know, publishing their work, or even considering submitting to a journal. In that respect, how do you think that journals can engage with their authors in a better and healthier way?
I think one of the key things is to be accessible. I mean, certainly in my early career, I'd read some journals and I think, oh, I would never dare submitting anything to them. They're all too highbrow. You know, and you look at the names and you think, well, that's a really well-known name. I'm not going to mention any names, but, you know, I've looked at there's some, you know, some very well-known names in diabetes or in vascular stuff, and I thought, oh, no, I couldn't possibly. And then you know, it stops you, and you have to think to yourself, well, actually, they're just a person. You know, they've whatever route they've got to, they're in the, you know, they've got to this role because, or they've got to this route because of their knowledge and their opportunities and whatever, but they're just a person. And, you know, I've learned over many decades that most people are really nice, and most people who have got to the top of their profession are usually, not always, usually quite humble. And, you know, people who are in their early part of the career, they're more than happy to talk to, chat to, you know, be informal with and support and help. And I think as a journal, any journal, I think needs to make its readers and potential contributors feel that the people who are on the board or the people who be looking at their work are actually critical friends, not critics. I think that's the difference. And I think if somebody does submit something, you know, I think the feedback has to be, it has to be supportive and it has to be constructive, so that, you know, somebody can make changes. And it, you know, really feedback is a mentoring process. And I think if, you know, if a journal wants to make people feel comfortable with it and submitting to it and want to engage with it, then, you know, they have to actually be that mentor, really, I think.
That's very, very well put. And I completely agree. I think mentorship is such a key thing for not just researchers, but up and coming podiatrists as well. Because I know, you know, from personal experience, I ask some of the most ridiculous questions. And and I've been very lucky in the sense that I've had mentors in my life that have been quite supportive. And if I've asked a question that was, you know, quite silly, they've said, well, okay, I see why you see it like this, but then try looking at it this way. And it's just been like very supportive and incredible, well, actually very, very supportive. And it's been really nice. And I think I completely agree. I think if you're gonna criticize somebody's work, do it in a way that makes them feel not attacked, but just incredibly supported, or help them see a different perspective on things. So I fully agree. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me today. It's been absolutely fantastic. What advice would you give to either a younger Judith Barbaro that was just starting out in research? What advice would you give her looking back at all the stuff that you've done now?
I think the probably two things I'd say. The first bit is, don't worry what people think of you, because it's not important. And I think one of the things that we all worry about is what other people will think of what we say, or what our opinion is, or if we put work out there, it's scary because you're putting a part of yourself out there. And actually, don't worry what people think. They like it, they won't like it, doesn't matter. Okay, you've actually had the guts to put something out there, which a lot of people don't do. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. And I think, what would the other bit? I think it would be along the lines of And so it's, don't worry about what you don't know, because the further along I've gone, the more I realize I don't know. So, you know, you kind of start out in early career, particularly in early career research, you're thinking, oh, I don't know about theoretical paradigms, I don't know about this. It actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because somebody will always help you. And, you know, there's that good old Dr. Google if you're stuck for kind of, you know, definitions of things. So actually, you know, don't worry about what you don't know.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't hold you back. What holds you back is not admitting to yourself that you don't know.
Yes. Oh my God. Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much. That's a fabulous way to end our interview today. But yes, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us. Thank you so much for being part of the editorial board for the Foot and Diabetes Journal. Thank you so much. Well, enjoy the rest of your day and take care. Bye.
All right then. Nice to talk to you. Bye.